Anyway guys, I guess if you want the 5-second version of this video, I messed up. I'm an idiot. If you take something apart, put all the bolts back in. This is another old rusty plow truck, DT466E. I can make it leak lots of coolant. Using my special bolt resizer, it's now a 3/8. And would you believe if I told you it was rusted in place? Have I mentioned this truck is rusty? There's one of the oil pump bolts. I think that's the back side of our crack. Well, I took the old Sawzall blade and just zipped right through that steel sleeve. Pretty much every other tapped hole on this cover is either stripped or has already been heel coiled. And it looks pretty good. I think it's going to be fine. Personally, I'm kind of in the devil you know camp. Well, something's wrong. I'm not getting any oil pressure. So we could have a problem with that gasket. I did not replace it. This is the new one. I left the old one in place. Put the pump back together, but I'm going to use some of this really thick assembly lube. If the thing hadn't been so rusty, it wouldn't have taken that long at all. Alright guys, my rusty plow truck is back. Ever since I fixed it, it's been having problems starting. And sometimes you have to crank it a long time to get it to start. Sometimes it starts right up. Doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. Every time that it doesn't want to start, if I take the temperature sensor out of the high pressure oil reservoir and check it, the oil level is low. There's still some oil in it, but the oil level is pretty low. There's been a few other small problems. Twice now, the oil has puked out of the breather tube. But it only happens when it's extremely cold outside. And even with the block heater on, one time it did that. So I don't know what the cause is there, but it's a lot of oil that comes out of that breather tube when it happens. But that's only happened twice, and I can't get it to happen consistently. They're fed up with it, and I don't blame them, so we're going to have to try to fix that. This thing should start right up and run just fine. I'm kind of pulling my hair out over it. There's a few other minor problems. He says the fuel sending unit does not work on the fuel tank here, so you see it's all green and crusty. I imagine we're going to find either an electrical issue or the float's stuck. He said it shows about half a tank all the time, even when they fill it all the way up. There's also a bad air leak whenever you press the brake pedal, so I suspect we're going to find a bad diaphragm in one of the brake chambers. I also noticed that it's leaking quite a lot of oil from the engine, and the bottom of the oil pan is pretty wet. So I kind of panicked for a minute and thought maybe I forgot to tighten up the drain plug when I drained the oil out, but that's not the case. X marks the spot there. It's actually leaking from a hole in the side of the oil pan. So that's a pretty common issue where we live. It's just rust. The oil pan has rusted through. There's probably no chance we can weld it up or braze it up. We're just going to have to replace the pan. I'm going to drain the oil out of it though, because it's probably got $80 worth of brand new oil in it that's leaking out on the floor. Also, the plow frame here is totally dickered. So they welded it once before and it broke again through the weld. Probably just bounced it down too many frozen gravel roads. The other side's also cracked in the same spot. It's just not broken yet, so we'll have to beef up both sides. Wah, wah, wah. This is the engine oil temperature sensor on this International DT466E. Threads in right here on the back of the inner timing cover. And this is the high pressure oil pump right here for the HUE system. And it draws oil out of a reservoir that's built into the timing cover. So you see right there, there is oil in the high pressure oil reservoir. However, it should be a lot higher. It should be, I don't know, about here. I think the book says about a pint of oil should fit in the reservoir above the engine oil temperature sensor. So if you take this sensor out and there's no oil in there, you got a problem. So we have a problem. So ever since I resealed the timing cover on this truck, it's had an intermittent no-start condition. So every once in a while you'll go to start it and it just won't do anything. It cranks and cranks and cranks and does nothing. Or it kind of starts, sputters, and then dies and won't restart. So what's happening is the oil level in this high pressure oil reservoir is too low. Sometimes it runs all the way down. Sometimes it comes down far enough that after the truck starts, it won't run long enough to build base oil pressure and refill this reservoir before all the oil is used up. So I don't know what the cause of it is. It seems to be very intermittent. Sometimes it'll all run out of there in about 2 hours. Sometimes it takes 2 weeks. Sometimes it doesn't happen at all. It doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason. Now the customer says they never had this problem before we took the timing cover apart, so I guess that leads us to believe that we must have pinched a gasket or something inside this timing cover when we put it back together, because no other variables have changed. The problem is I cannot prove that without taking the timing cover back off, which is not a fun job to do. Well, I guess I'm going to pull the outer timing cover off and I'll bring you guys back, show you what I find. I mean, there's nothing really to see there that we haven't seen already. It's the same job. I don't think there's a problem with the inner timing cover, so we don't have to go quite as far. But still, it's a pretty big job to get the outer timing cover off. You got to pull the balancer back off, oil pump, you got to support the engine, take the front engine mounts off. All this cooling system and other garbage on the front of the engine all has to come off. No sense crying about it, and might as well just get it done. Here is the outer timing cover, removed from the engine. And what do you think that I found? Go ahead and take a guess. I'll give you a hint. The abbreviation would be SFA. Yeah, absolutely nothing. So this is the portion right here that is the reservoir for the high pressure oil pump. So the oil comes in here from the oil rail and travels up this channel. This section of the timing cover basically acts like a P-trap, and it traps oil in this area and creates a reservoir for the high pressure oil pump. So the high pressure oil pump feeds off of the oil in this reservoir to fire the injectors. So that lets the engine run for a short time and allows the oil pump to refill this cavity. And if all goes according to plan, it's a seamless process. You don't ever notice it. So we thought maybe we would find a pinched gasket. That's not the case. This gasket looks great. So when this first happened, I went to the international dealership and I talked to one of their technicians. He said he's seen a similar situation before, and the problem was that the timing cover was warped. It wasn't flat. So I just checked it with the straight edge. This thing's just as flat as it can possibly be. It's actually impressively flat for such a large casting. So that is not the problem. Same story over here on the inner timing cover. This thing is just as flat as it can possibly be. That's not the problem. I'm setting up here to run a little bit of an experiment, and I just glued this piece of kind of plexiglass, or whatever it is, acrylic, I don't know, something. I tried to kind of glue it onto the front timing cover using some silicone. I'm going to let that sit for 24 hours, and then we're going to come in here and fill this up with oil. Then we're going to let it sit for another 24 hours, and we're going to monitor the oil level. I don't think we're going to find anything. I don't think it's possible for the oil to leak down through the pump. I don't know. There is a passage right here in the bottom of the timing cover that allows oil to come back out into the timing cover area under very specific conditions, but I don't think that can happen, you know, just sitting here. So I'm formulating a theory, and it has to do with the oil pump pickup tube. This is a schematic view of the low pressure oil system inside this DT466E. This is from the service manual, and it starts here. This is your pickup tube that sucks the oil up out of the oil pump, comes up to the front timing cover, goes through the gear rotor oil pump here, comes out into a passageway to the oil cooler, It can either go through the oil cooler or bypass the oil cooler depending on temperature. There's like a little thermostat or something that opens up inside here. Anyway, then you can't really see this one, but it goes up here to this oil passage. Like some people call it the oil rifle. It's a gun-drilled passage that goes all the way through the engine. Then it provides oil to the main bearings and the cam bearings, and eventually it makes its way to this section of the timing cover and comes up into that P-trap area. That's the reservoir for the high-pressure oil pump. So the high-pressure oil pump draws its oil from this section here, like I said, and that allows it to run until we get oil pressure feeding this reservoir again. So you don't have to wait for the base oil pressure to build up in order for the engine to start, because that would take forever, because these things are really hard priming on the oil pump. Here's my theory. What if there's something wrong in this section right here? We're trying to suck oil from the oil pan up into the oil pump. What if there's a bad gasket or a crack or something in this pickup tube and it's allowing air to mix in with the oil? So now we have this aerated oil. The aerated oil gets fed all the way through the system up into this reservoir. So now the reservoir is completely full of aerated oil. We shut the engine off, we let the engine sit. The air that's mixed in with the oil eventually makes its way to the top of the chamber, leaving behind the oil at the bottom. So the amount of air that's mixed in with the oil will determine how much oil is going to be left in this reservoir after the engine stops running. And we can pull the oil temperature sensor out while the engine's running and confirm that there is in fact oil making its way to the reservoir. We don't have a problem there. I'm wondering if maybe we have a problem with air in the oil. So I don't know how to test that other than to remove the oil pan and just visually inspect the oil pickup tube and this gasket. I know the gasket's there, I can see it, but I don't know the condition of this oil pickup tube. I tried to snake a borescope down in through this oil pickup tube. You can't do it. It makes a sharp 90-degree and another sharp 90-degree turn before it goes back into the oil pan. I think the shape of it's quite a bit more complicated than what this drawing actually shows. So the oil pan's got to come off anyway because it's got a hole in it. I think that's our next move. Drop the oil pan, see what's going on. Now, why would it have become a problem after we worked on this? I don't know. So we had these bolts out. So maybe I disturbed the pickup tube a little bit, opened up the crack a little bit, or something like that, or I caused the damage to this gasket that I didn't see. That's my theory right now. I should call this something catchy like, watch this before you become a truck mechanic. The one video you must see. Let me show you what we're dealing with. This is the bottom end of this greasy old bastard. Oh boy, she's been leaking oil and coolant and hydraulic oil all over the floor for about 4 days. Oh, there's the oil pan. Let's see if I can squeeze my fat belly underneath of this stupid exhaust. Okay, some of these bolts I already replaced because I thought I was going to drop the oil pan the last time. Yeah, so that's pretty typical of an oil pan bolt on this truck. Basically nothing left of the hex. Now you would think with this thing leaking so much oil that it would have formed some kind of a protective coating over these bolts, but it did not. There's almost nothing left of them. Oh, that first one there looks pretty scary. So, oil pan's junk. Like I said, got a hole blasted right through it. So we'll probably have to just cut those off with a torch and deal with them later. But I'll see how many I can get out. My used parts place does not have an oil pan that's any good. Theirs are all rotted out too. So we're going to have a new one. Either a new international pan or a aftermarket. This thing continues to be very, very frustrating. I got the pan off. Wasn't too terrible bad. Had a few bolts that came out the hard way, especially that little guy. But heating them with the torch, beating them with the air hammer, clamping them with vice grips, I got them all out without torching any of them off. So no worries there. There's the pickup tube. I did my best to pressure test it. As far as I can tell, there's nothing wrong with it. So that kills our whole theory of sucking air. That's not the problem. Here's the front cover. I filled this reservoir P-trap area up with diesel fuel, let it sit for 24 hours. Can't see it leaking anywhere through the casting. That's not the problem. So our test setup here on the inner timing cover has done its job. I filled it up with oil about 18 hours ago, and the oil level has not come down at all. So it's definitely not leaking down through the high pressure pump. At least not fast enough to cause the problem that we're having. This is the O-ring right here, and this is the bottom of that P-trap area, and it's got a lot of flash on it, but that shouldn't hurt anything because the groove is only in one side. So it sits down in a groove on the outer timing cover, and then the inner timing cover where it presses against this is just flat. But there is an area, let me try to show you. You see that kind of funky looking area right there? It kind of looks like it might have been pinched. There's a bunch of flash right here. I'm wondering if maybe that was where there was a gate in the mold, because you know it's a kind of a T intersection. That would be a good place to gate it. And maybe when they cut the gate off, they didn't quite get her all the way off. So if I take and I kind of try to pinch that here, you can see I got, what, 15 thousandths, 17 thousandths. It's fairly thick, whereas the flash on the rest of the parts, yeah, like that's only 3 thousandths. Like I said, it shouldn't have mattered because the O-ring should fit down inside that groove, and all this flash should just tuck in that groove and it shouldn't cause a problem. Alright, fellas, it's time to face facts. There's nothing wrong with this engine other than the goober behind the camera. I mean, the problem with being a human, which I am, is that there's nobody easier to fool than yourself. Now, which is more likely? That this truck developed some kind of a bizarre 1 in a million fault exactly the same time that we had the front cover apart to reseal it? Or that I just screwed up when I put it together? I think you know. So I ordered a new gasket set. We're going to put it right back together just like it was, except we're going to try to do a better job this time, and we're going to hope for a better result. I got the timing cover cleaned up again. Pretty short process because it's only got like 5 hours on it. Okay, from our friends at International, I picked up a new oil pan gasket. It's kind of a funky design, real thick, kind of stiff material. Almost 60 bucks for that stupid gasket, which is unbelievable. But that's not the worst. I got all new bolts for the oil pan. These are M8 bolts with the 10mm heads. There are 2 different lengths. The longer ones go on the side where those kind of stiffener brackets go on the side of the oil pan. I'll show you that later. Anyway, what do you think International charges for these bolts? They are $5.70 a piece. So there's 22 bolts in the oil pan. It costs almost $100 to replace all of them. That is insane. I can buy basically equivalent flange head M8 bolts from a McMaster-Carr. I can buy 50 of them for $7. That's delivered to my door. I also bought another timing cover gasket set. I wanted to buy just the gaskets for the outer timing cover. He said it's cheaper to buy just the whole set. Anyway, we are going to install that timing cover with a new gasket set. I do not recommend that you use these O-ring style gaskets over again. Well, I'm not so sure. This is the old gasket. That's the spot where I thought maybe I pinched it. So this is the new gasket. It looks exactly the same in that area. So I don't know. That's definitely a spot where a gate is cut off, or a runner. You know, when they mold these parts, it has to have a gate, and then they have to cut that off, and that's definitely where it shows up. But I don't know. I'm not finding that smoking gun. I guess it's ready to go. I trimmed the gasket here and then used some silicone here, there, and there. You're supposed to silicone where the various pieces of the gasket meet up, and the seams in the gasket, or the splices in the gasket, are where there's no pressure. That's just the front gear area of the timing cover, which can still leak, but there shouldn't be, like 50 pounds of oil pressure there. And then, same as I did before, I used some grease and just packed the gasket with grease to try to hold it in place while I set the cover in there. I got anti-seize in the dowel holes. Cross our fingers. I'm going to very, very carefully install that, and we are going to hope for the best. All right, fellas, let's have a little chat. This is the oil pickup tube on this DT466 engine. There is nothing wrong with this oil pickup tube. It is mounted to the engine with 3 bolts. One of them is a short little guy like this with a washer. Goes through this little bracket vertically into the bottom of the engine. The other 2 bolts look like this. They come horizontally through the timing cover into the suction tube, and they hold the suction tube to the back of the timing cover and basically to the back of the oil pump. Now, I was installing the oil pump on the timing cover, and I started thinking, I don't remember taking these 2 bolts loose. And then I started looking. I could not find these 2 bolts anywhere. I will give you one guess why I couldn't find these bolts. That's correct. I did not install them the last time I put this truck together. I'm about 95% sure that's the case. So, yeah. The only thing holding the pickup tube in was this one bolt through the bracket here to the bottom of the block. And this gasket was still there, attached to the suction tube, but it was not clamped to the back of the timing cover. It was basically just sitting there, flapping in the breeze. At least I'm pretty sure it was. So, how do we want to look at this? I guess our air suction theory was correct, but for the wrong reason. The reason was not that the pickup tube was cracked. The reason was that I'm an idiot and I forgot to put the freaking bolts back in. So, yeah. This is a very costly lesson to always check your work. I can't believe that. I'm positive that's the problem. I'm positive that I didn't put these bolts back in. Let me go show you where they're at. You can sort of understand where I'm coming from. Well, let me try to show you guys where those bolts would be located. So there's your oil pump right there on the front of the timing cover. All the way down here at the bottom. You see those 2 notches? That's where the bolts for the pickup tube should be located. So I think the reason I didn't catch that, number one, is because I didn't check, I didn't look, and number 2 is because we replaced all of the hardware in the timing cover the last time it was apart. So you remember how rusty this thing was. You know, I would have noticed if I had 2 bolts left over, but because I was replacing them with all new, you know, I just didn't catch it. So yeah, man, I feel stupid. Unbelievably stupid. I mean, that problem right there probably cost me 10 hours of work and $250, maybe $300 worth of parts over 2 freaking bolts that I forgot. I can't believe it worked at all. I mean, you remember in that second video when I had trouble getting the oil pump to prime? I mean, of course I had problems getting it to prime. The freaking suction tube wasn't connected to the timing cover. Yeah, unbelievable. And that explains our high pressure reservoir. There wasn't a problem with the gasket. It was just aerated oil, just like I said. So anyway, yeah, I'm gonna put it back together and we're gonna move on. But man, I feel stupid. One new oil pan. This is a Dorman Chinese aftermarket oil pan. International wants $700 for a new oil pan. I can sell them this one for less than $300. So I gave them the choice. Obviously they chose to go aftermarket. Now I don't know how good or bad this Dorman thing is. I do know that it is exactly the same size and shape, and it should bolt right up. Now, I recall, I believe it was Rich at DeBoss Garage made a video about a 5.9 Cummins that was destroyed by an aftermarket oil pan. I think it was probably a Dorman. And what happened was that they used this same crappy black paint on the inside of the oil pan, and the paint peeled off and clogged the pickup tube and basically starved the engine for oil. Anyway, that's the kind of risk you take with aftermarket parts, but you know, how can you blame them? It's less than half the cost, and you know, I'd be surprised if this truck's got another 5 years in it. So you know, how much money do we really want to go winging at it? These are the side supports for the oil pan. So these go along the side of the pan, and I guess just kind of help keep the thing flat. Anyway, they're just made from some kind of bar stock, but you can see there's not a whole lot left of them. They're just so rusty. The left side's not so bad. The right side is really bad. I did my best to try to kind of straighten it out, but you can probably see on the camera it just kind of does this between every bolt hole, just from where the rust jacking has pushed it out, and there's nothing we can do about that. I don't know, I did not inquire about new ones. I hate to think about what they would cost. We can make them, but I don't think it's that critical. I got the top side of the engine all put back together. You know, nothing to see there. Same as we did before, just this time I'm a little faster at it. I don't know how well this is going to work, but we'll try to show you a little bit here of the bottom side of the engine. So just like the top side of the engine, it is very, very rusty, especially over here on the right side. You can see kind of along the bottom skirt here of the block how rough and corroded that is. I chipped off all the big rust and kind of tried my best to clean it up, but it's still pretty rough. So I don't know what we're going to do. We'll probably just have to put some silicone on the top side of that oil pan gasket and kind of just do one of these and hope for the best. There's nothing else we can do. I thought about maybe just taking the oil pan gasket out completely and just using silicone. I'm not sure how that would work. I don't see what it would hurt. Anyway, yeah, pretty rough down here. Look at that oil cooler. I'm telling you, that thing's about 10 seconds away from rusting all the way through. Same with the oil return tube from the turbo. Yeah. I'm gonna make sure the doors are locked when that thing finally blows, because I do not want to get involved. Look at that pedestal. The pedestals are aluminum. See the steel bolt that goes all the way through that thing? We'll never get those out. Might as well just cut them off, order new pedestals and a new cooler, try to get the bolts out of the block. That's all you could do. Anyway, they're really pushing me to get this thing back. They want to plow some snow with it, so I think for the time being we're gonna have to pretend that we don't see that power steering hose rubbing through on the air compressor bracket. Looks like it might be leaking a little bit already, but I do not have time to fix it right now. That'll work. We'll put a little bit of RTV silicone, just a light film on one side of the gasket, and then we'll leave the pan side as is. Alrighty folks, I think we're about done. We got the new oil pan installed, all torqued up, looks good. Refilled the oil. It was about, I don't know, about 5 quarts low, so that makes sense. You know, that oil pan was leaking pretty badly. I also refilled the coolant, and I used a pretty cool tool that I picked up not too long ago. This is a vacuum coolant refilling tool, and you know, I kind of live in my own little bubble over here, so I wasn't really that familiar with these tools. I watched a video from Super Mario Diagnostics, and he showed how to use his version of this tool, and I asked him a few questions. He answered those questions, and I decided I needed to have one. So I just jumped on eBay and bought the cheapest one I could possibly find because I wanted to try it out. I was a little bit skeptical, and I am completely sold. This thing is awesome. So I'll probably use this one for a little while until I finally break it, because the whole thing is plastic and I'm sure it's not gonna live very long around here. And then I'll buy a better one. But yeah, pretty sweet tool. And I think I paid 30 bucks for this thing on eBay. Yeah, I don't see how you can really go wrong with one of these. It's super simple. Just uses compressed air to form a venturi that pulls a vacuum inside the cooling system, and then you use that vacuum to suck the coolant right back into the engine, and that way you don't have any, you know, air bubbles or anything like that. The thing just fills right up. Well, this tube's been cracked for a long time. You can tell by how rusty it is in the crack there. And it's been welded several times. Looks like to varying degrees of success. So obviously the backside's the hardest part, and they didn't do the greatest job there. It's also cracked this way behind this big bracket. So I'm not sure what we're going to do yet. This is actually pretty thin material. I think it's only 3/8. And I thought that this was going to be like the other plow frames I've seen. They're made from 2 pieces of angle welded together, but this is actually just a box section, so a little bit different. Alright, got our tube all V'd out and prepped, ready to weld. I went ahead and picked the whole plow up a little bit and just set it on a jack stand so I can get to the bottom side. Not quite sure how I want to fix it. I'm thinking, so obviously the tube cracked on both sides right at the end of where this hoop comes around. That's the swing frame or whatever you want to call it. And it seems like they didn't build this quite right. But what they should have done is triangulated from the outermost point of the blade back to the pivot here. I attempted to weld up what I thought was a small crack at the top of this vertical rib. Turned out that that was really just a rust hole, and this whole area here is super thin. So I did the best I could to kind of patch it together, and we're going to throw some paint on that and forget about it. Everything else is welded within an inch of its life, and that's probably as far as I'm going to go with it. I don't know about putting any fish plates or welding any brackets or gussets on here, because I don't know if there's parts of this plow that are missing, because for whatever reason it doesn't appear to have any shoes, you know, the little feet that the plow rides on. And I've never seen a plow before that didn't have like guide shoes or whatever they're technical term for it is. So that's got to be something that's missing. I would think maybe they bolt right here to this bracket. Alright, same idea on the other side. There's kind of a low spot right here. I tried to build that up a little bit. It looks to me like there was probably another one of those L-shaped brackets welded right here originally, and for whatever reason they've cut it off. So I don't know if that's part of the reason why that's starting to crack, or if it has nothing to do with it. I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to throw some paint on that, and then I'm going to get out of here because it's way past quitting time. Okay fellas, moment of truth. I let the engine sit overnight because I wanted the silicone that we put on the oil pan there to cure a little bit before we tried to run it. It's supposed to cure for 24 hours. It's only been about 18 hours, but you know, we just put that real thin film on there, so I think we're going to be just fine. I have already primed the high pressure oil pump reservoir, so I just took the engine oil temperature sensor out, squeezed maybe a quart of oil in there, and put the temperature sensor back in. And I also packed the main engine oil pump with grease, just like we had to do before to get it to prime up. So let's see what happens. Okay, yep, it's got to be this chamber right here. Is it the hose? I think so. Okay, so I think it might be both. The hose is definitely leaking. And the pancake. Show you guys how I changed that brake chamber diaphragm real quick. First step, you need air pressure. We just ran it till we hit purge on the air dryer, so 120 pounds. And then you need to release your brakes. But the first step before you can release the brakes, make sure you chock the wheels. I'll tell you a story. I used to work in a truck repair shop, and we had two trucks in the shop, both with their hoods open, just like this one, and sitting across from each other, two bays. The trucks were nose to nose. Anyway, the shop was set up so the floor would slope towards the middle, and there's a floor drain. And a guy brought a truck in to grease it. He jacked the front axle up, released the brakes, and forgot to chock the wheels. And the truck jumped off the jack, rolled forward, and the hood that was open crashed into another truck that was in front of it that had its hood open, and basically destroyed the hoods on both trucks. So chock your wheels. So here's our brake can, our brake chamber, and right now the brakes are released, so I can move this slack adjuster around as I want to. Looks like it's pretty stiff. Anyway, that is the most important part. Do not try to remove this brake chamber with the brakes set. There's an immense amount of pressure in here from the spring inside this brake chamber, and if you take this band off while it's pushing on the slack adjuster, it's going to come flinging off of there. That actually happened to me one time. Scared the crap out of me, and probably could have hurt me pretty badly. So a couple of things I do. I always leave the hoses hooked up. That way, if you pop this thing off and it goes flying, the hoses are going to catch it. The other thing you can do, if you're nervous about it, is take this plug out of the end of the chamber and cage the brakes. So go ahead and put a caging bolt in here and hold the spring compressed. Now the air will do that for us, so we don't technically have to do that, but if you want to be safe, that's the best way. Now normally the caging bolt will be stored right here in this hole. You see that whoever put these brake chambers on decided to just go ahead and throw those in their toolbox. Usually they're rusted in there so bad that you can't get them out anyway, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, what we're going to do is take this V-band clamp off and separate the brake can from the base here. So usually when you replace these brake chambers, they do what they call a piggyback. So they just replace from here out, and they leave the can, they leave the base and the old push rod. Because if you have to replace the entire chamber, you got to get these nasty looking bolts out, and you got to measure the rod and get all the geometry right so that the automatic slack adjusters will work. And it looks like these probably don't work anyway because I think this bracket's rusted off, but that's a problem for another day. Anyway, we're going to take this bolt out here, take this V-band clamp out. I think there's 2 bolts on it, yeah. Now, if you ever see a brake chamber that has a V-band clamp here on the emergency side of the brake chamber, don't mess with it. Back in the day, they used to make this a serviceable item so you could take the brake can apart. But like I said, there's a massive spring inside here. And I believe it's actually been illegal to make those brake chambers for a long time. But every once in a while you see an old-time truck that has one of those serviceable brake chambers. And guys have been killed by those. You know, they take the wrong side off, and that spring that's under immense pressure in there comes flying out of there and whacks them in the head or the gut or something and kills them. So if you ever see one that has a clamp here that's removable, just replace the whole chamber as fast as you can, because those are scary dangerous. Oh, who put this freaking thing on? Well, they made it so I couldn't put an impact on it, which is not very nice of them. So this is the diaphragm, or in the business we call it a pancake, and people hate it when I use pet names for stuff instead of the technical term. So it is technically a diaphragm, but I guarantee that if you walk into any truck parts place in the United States and ask for a brake chamber pancake, a 30-30 pancake, this is what you're going to get. So I went ahead and cleaned up this surface right here. The diaphragm does not seal against that surface, but if it's not clean, then it can affect how it pinches against the chamber itself, and you won't get a good seal. Also, I'm going to have to go back and review the footage that I just shot, but I think they had this brake chamber in backwards. You see, this is how it's supposed to be put in, and you see how the rusty side is on the inside? I think they had it, I don't know, like this some way? Anyway, whatever. We're going to put it on like this. Oh, this is the new one right here. And I keep these in stock. Well, the common size ones anyway, the 30s and the 24s. Come on. Got us a new brake hose, and it's even the right length. Looks good. I'll go ahead and get that installed. I'm not going to film putting that in because I can't even hardly fit underneath this truck. It's such a low dragger. Anyway, if you can't find the right size, I don't know if it's totally kosher, but I have pieced these together before. You just use a little union and this little adapter and just splice together enough short pieces to get the length that you need. Anyway, these guys are kind of hard on airlines. This is one that I replaced about a week ago on a different truck. They had a little bit too big of a hole in the exhaust pipe. Well, I had to show you guys this. Here's the new air hose we just installed. There's that quick release valve. But check out this other air hose. That goes to the same side on the rear axle. And she is kinked right off. So I don't know what's going on with that. I'm going to try to cut those zip ties loose, and we'll loosen this fitting up here, see if we can straighten that out. Because it can't be working like it is. I mean, not very well. Okay. I think that looks a little bit better. I don't have any explanation for how that happened. I mean, that's a swivel fitting up there. There's no reason that it should be coiled up like that. Yeah, I don't know. Alright guys, we got to cut the video here. They want the truck back. It's supposed to snow tonight, and they want to get it ready. They want to take the salt out of the box and get new salt put in and check the plow and make sure everything's ready to go. So I've got to scramble around here and get cleaned up and get the thing out the door. I don't like that I don't have time to check, you know, a few things on the engine. We haven't really done any testing with it, but it seems to start and run good. It sat here for 2 weeks. Well, not quite 2 weeks. About a week and a half. And it basically started right up just by priming that high pressure reservoir. So I think the problem was that we had air in the oil, and then it was also feeding air into the HPOP system. Remember, this engine uses oil to fire the injectors, and if we had oil mixed with air trying to fire the injectors, you know, pressure's pressure, so when it's running it's going to work. But after the engine sits and the oil settles to the bottom and the air settles to the top, now it's basically like you have air in the HPOP system. Anytime you have air in that HPOP system, they won't start. They have to crank a long time, and you know, it takes a long time for that to bleed out, and basically that's happening to it every time because we're introducing air into the oil. Anyway guys, I guess if you want the 5-second version of this video, I messed up. I'm an idiot. If you take something apart, put all the bolts back in. And yeah, learning that lesson was very costly for me, but we got it fixed now. The customer is happy, I think. So let's just move on. There's no sense crying about it. So anyway, I don't know how much of a video is going to come out of this. It's kind of just thrown together, but I want to post it because, you know, this is a mistake that could happen to other people. Might as well let it happen to me so it doesn't happen to you. Alright guys, thanks for sticking it out. That one really fought me, and this is a wonderful sight in my opinion.